Let's go Cleveland Browns 31, Jacksonville Jaguars 27. Browns move to 8-5. Jags fall to 8-5. Trevor Lawrence did end up playing, despite the ankle injury. Throws the ball 50 times. They didn't take anything off his plate.
No.
This was another, hectic game as far as game flow goes. The Browns got up 14-0. And again, every time the Jags kept trying to come back, Cleveland did a really good job. For much of the game, they were up at least a touchdown or two. Jags did have opportunities to come back in the fourth quarter, but Joe Flacco and the Browns making big plays when it mattered.
Joe Flacco and the Browns. This was a turnover fest, this game.
It really was.
Trevor Lawrence throwing interceptions and the Browns fumbling the ball was generally how this game was going, back and forth. So you asked before, was there any obvious evidence of Trevor Lawrence being injured? Like, if we reach this point now where NFL players are just superhuman freak shows, like a high ankle sprain used to be you're done for a month.
Yeah.
And then you're back and you're still not 100%. Now, he was 6 days. And he's out there and there's no visible evidence that he was injured. Now,
did you get, in the boo-boo breakdown, did you get any comparisons? I listened to it, but I can't remember. Any comparisons to Mahomes' injury?
No, we didn't talk about that too much. But we mentioned it off air on Friday. Like, he's going to look like Mahomes in the playoffs, only it's going to be bad, right? Like, Mahomes somehow couldn't move. Was like literally couldn't hobble around the place, but went out there, played the game, and still somehow didn't play any worse. It was insane. I was like, this is going to put into like contrast how well he did in that playoff performance. It kind of did, but like Lawrence didn't look like that. He could actually move around fine, and if you didn't know he was injured, you wouldn't have seen it from the tape. Like, you wouldn't look at him and go, oh, that's a guy that's visibly hobbled. He can't move around. But there were some throws in there, I think can, I don't want to say can only be explained by an injury, but make more sense as an explanation of an injury. Like the first weird heave of an interception where he missed Zay Jones by like 7 yards over his head. Like, he's not under pressure. He's got open space. He steps into it. You're like, that throw, a guy like Lawrence doesn't miss by that degree if there's not a reason for it. Like, he was just way off. So I think where his injury showed up was on plays like that, where you're like, it just jacks the mechanics of what he's doing. Foot goes into the turf.
Right.
It's different. It's not the same strength. Consequently, he's like an order of magnitude further off than he would normally be on that throw.
And that is where, if you rewatched Mahomes playing, Mahomes did not have mobility. So he came back in the Jags game after looking like he couldn't walk.
Yeah.
And then played the next week against the Bengals in the AFC Championship. Limited mobility, and he kind of got re-injured in that game. So he wasn't moving around that well. But every now and again, he'd step into a throw, and things would just kind of like, he bounced a throw. Like, he just missed some throws, which looked like it was probably the ankle. But like Lawrence, when he was moving around, 6 days later, after he could barely put any weight on the thing, and he was like maneuvering the pocket and running, like, you didn't see any. I didn't see any mobility issues, but maybe it just showed up on a couple throws where they became, errant throws that he's missing.
Yeah, I mean, he was scrambling around like it didn't look like a guy that was hobbled, but there were a couple of throws in there where I don't think it makes much sense for that throw unless something has messed with his mechanics or his whole sort of biomechanical, throwing mechanism.
So just a couple things to highlight here. If you were watching the game, you saw a lot of Martin Emerson from the Browns.
Well, that's because Lawrence kept throwing the ball to him.
Lawrence kept throwing the ball to him. Emerson breaking up passes, had a defensive stop. He had a huge game. The other thing that was different, you have Blake Nance playing left tackle for the Jags. He's normally a guard. I mean, it was just this makeshift offensive line that Jacksonville had. When Hance came in, he had 41 pass blocking snaps, and he will have, maybe 10 or so pressures allowed. A lot in the fourth quarter. It was, after the game may have been out of hand, but across the board, the offensive line for the Jags was not good. That would be one other difference. It felt like remember when Mahomes did get hurt last year in the Jags game and the offensive line was like, we will not let anyone near our quarterback. The guy can't even walk. And it was some of the most pristine pockets I've ever seen, like the Tooney and Creed Humphrey and those dudes cracked down. The Jags did not in this one, and it's tough against this Browns pass rush. So they were getting heat on Trevor Lawrence for a lot of the game, and again, the Browns defense just stepping up, making life difficult. I know they gave up points, but they made a lot of big-time plays in this one, Browns defense.
I was bummed that, so we got some, sometimes you get pieces of evidence where you're like, I would really like to see this happen. And, teams, for whatever reason, have decided a guy plays a different position or doesn't have this role. You're like, I'd just love to see this happen. Ezra Cleveland was one of these, prototypical college left tackles where you're like, that guy is pretty lightweight and, is more of a finesse type of blocker. And then the Vikings draft him and move him inside to guard. And you're like, that's the last player I would move into guard, a lightweight finesse left tackle. Moves inside where you have to deal with bigger, stronger players. I was always curious what would happen if Ezra Cleveland actually played left tackle. Well, because of the injuries, the Jags were playing him at left tackle, and then he goes down, and they've got to start or bring out Blake Hance. And it's like,
Ezra Cleveland lasts just 27 snaps at left tackle.
Yeah, and they weren't great, but I would have liked to have seen,
Sure.
even if it was only one game, a full game of Ezra Cleveland playing left tackle.
So the Jags have gone through Cam Robinson, Walker Little, Ezra Cleveland, now down to Blake Nance.
Yeah, and, let's remember that the assignment there is Myles Garrett.
Yeah.
And it's Myles Garrett who looked closer to being Myles Garrett than he's been the last couple of weeks since that shoulder injury.
Poor Blake Nance. I mean, some of the plays where Myles Garrett he's bending like a 220-pounder with speed and power, and it's just contorting his body in ways that shouldn't exist. But he had a sack on the 2-point conversion as well. The controversy, of course, because the Browns were favored by 3.5, Sam. And the Jags went for 2, down 4 at the end of the game there.
He got double teamed in that play and still made the sack on the foot. Like, that was crazy.
Which when they put up the resumes,
that's
the defensive player of the year, the sack on the 2-point conversion, which was pretty clutch, doesn't count there.
Not just pretty clutch. That's like, if that happens on a key 4th down somewhere in the game, that's like a defensive player of the year. That's your Heisman moment, right? Like, that's one of those plays that TJ Watt makes, right? High leverage against a double team, game-changing play. Like, those are the plays that Myles Garrett hasn't made in his NFL career generally before now. He makes one, and it's on a 2-point conversion, so no one will ever remember it.
Doesn't count. I remember those, Sam. I'll bring it up. You're a voter. You'll remember it. I also remember Nick Bosa had a pretty clean, awesome sack on a 2-point conversion against the Giants back in Week 3. I got them all stored up here.
Yeah, good.
When the TJ Watt sack totals come at us.
Remind me when we get to voting
I'll
time,
remind
so
you.
I
Don't forget, back in Week 14, Myles Garrett had the clutch 2-point conversion. Joe Flacco finishes 26 of 45 for 311 for the Browns. And I don't want to diminish Joe Flacco's sexy-looking stat line here. They're looking good. But Joe Flacco's 3 touchdowns went for, pull up my notes here.
It did feature this game, in addition to weird interceptions, it featured some of the most total coverage busts I've ever seen in my life.
So for the second straight week, the Browns score on their first drive, in which there's a coverage bust with nobody anywhere in the neighborhood.
A complete, literally, there wasn't a coverage defender on that side of the field.
Nope.
Like, Njoku scores a touchdown. Literally, there isn't a coverage guy on his side of the field. The guy who gets closest to him ends up being like the safety from the other side of the formation entirely. Like, I don't know if you're not going to see a more complete drop in coverage than that.
So again, Flacco had to, at least see him. Then you have David Njoku. What? Good job, Joe. David Njoku crossing route, runs through the defense for a 30-yarder. And then the final one, which ended up being the nail in the coffin, really, for the Browns, because they never lost this lead. They were up 21-14. It's 4th and 3. They're kind of in no man's land. Jags go all-out blitz. This was a good job by Flacco, finding the open man. He does a nice job kind of maneuvering the pocket, avoiding the rush. Gets the ball to David Bell, and the Jags fall down in coverage. Also don't cover him, who just runs wide open for a 41-yard touchdown.
On that first touchdown, the guy that ended up getting close to him was only brought in that direction because he was actually covering the tight end from the other side of the formation that was running a deep over. So if you take him out of it, the closest coverage defender to Njoku when the ball hit his hands would have been 20 yards of yardage markers plus the Pythagorean 20 yards laterally, whatever the hell that works out to be, he would have been like a good 20 yards away from him. That's how complete and total a coverage bust that was.
So yeah, it was. So Joe Flacco had 3 touchdowns for 105. On his 3 touchdowns, he picks up 105 passing yards, in part because I think it was mostly bad defense.
Critically, though, we've said before, Joe Flacco is a little bit like Desmond Ridder in terms of like the down-to-down level of his play is quite good. It's just that you're never that far away from the cataclysmic disaster play that tends to cost them games. He didn't have that in this game. Now, other people did. Like Amari Cooper catches the ball, goes on a run, then fumbles it away. So the Browns
Flacco got strip sacked on a play that was difficult to avoid. I mean he didn't.
So there were mistakes.
He didn't have egregious plays,
right? But
Flacco.
He didn't have that like the one random like the last week, right, where he just heaves it blindly into the middle of the field at a safety, and like what the hell is that? He didn't have that play. And if Joe Flacco can get through a game without one of those, this defense is good enough that they're probably going to win that game.
I don't know if we reviewed this Flacco play. It was an unblocked rusher. I don't know how much he needs to be able to see that. But you're right. I mean, it's like I used in PFF terms, if the Browns quarterback can play 70 grade, PFF grade football, then they're a very dangerous team. Flacco's in that range yesterday, played far better than anything we saw from DTR or PJ Walker. Deshaun Watson was starting to play close to this level here. I know there's funny stats out there about Flacco throwing more touchdowns than Watson and, whatever.
There is pretty funny stats.
There are some funny stats.
Browns have 4 multiple touchdown games by quarterbacks this season, and Joe Flacco has 2 of them.
See, it's a funny
already.
stat. It's
it
funny
is.
Because he's only started 2 games.
One other element. So DeJuan Jones has been hurt for a while, hurt to the degree that he missed this game. So they're starting James Hudson at right tackle, which means both their tackles are bad now at this point, right? Because they've already lost Jedrick Wills earlier in the season. So they're down to Jerron Christian and James Hudson as their starting tackles from Cleveland's point of view, with, an aging Joe Flacco as their quarterback. So it's not the ideal paradigm for perfect pass protection, clean pockets. Josh Allen, the Jags pass rusher, had a pretty good game, and he's been their primary source of pass rush all season long. But this is another one of those games where like, hey, where is Trayvon Walker? Like this is the game to show up. Like you've got 2 bad tackles. Pick your favorite and go beat him. And it didn't happen that much. Now it happened a couple of times, but again, like this is the game. You're being set up. You're going to have 35, 40 pass rushing opportunities against bad tackles. Go make hay. And he didn't.
So Jags fall. So let's recap this here. Browns moved to 8-5. Same record as the Chiefs and the Jags now. They're all 8-5. Browns are the top wild card team with the 6, 7, and 6 teams right behind them. So if the playoffs started today, guess what would happen? Rematch. Browns at the Jaguars this time. That would be the first round matchup. So the Jags sitting at 8-5, still atop the AFC South.